Today on the CTQ Smartcast, we are in conversation with Ramkumar Narayanan. So Ram is VP and Managing Site Director at VMware India. Previously, Ram has held engineering and product management roles at companies like Microsoft, Yahoo, and eBay. And he has a keen interest in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, in innovation, and quite a lot of other topics. So welcome, Ram.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Ram, today we want to chat about topics like future relevance, especially in the technology world, driving innovation as well as related topics. But we are quizzers, so we can't resist the opportunity of starting this conversation with a quick question. And it's a question about someone that you've met and interacted, Bill Gates, and a friend of his called Warren Buffett, whom I don't know if you know him, but you've heard of him.
Of course.
So both of them are famous for their love for this game, which they say keeps them mentally fit, and they like to play that all the time. In fact, Warren Buffett says this is the only thing that, or this is one of the things that he's better at than Gates. So do you know what we are talking about?
You want a Jeopardy style answer or a quiz style answer?
Either is fine.
What is bridge?
Absolutely. So you turn the tables on us. You get 100 points for that. Well, Ram. I think these two are very fine examples of people who've had very interesting careers, long spans of being relevant. So something that you do you play bridge, or is this what keeps you sharp?
No, I don't play bridge. I never learned it. So, in fact, I have a book somewhere back behind me that says teach yourself bridge, but I've never done it. I have, like, my father-in-law plays a lot of bridge, but I've never learned the game. And, so I'm not much of a card player, to be honest. What keeps, where I get my, just keep my mentally active is few things, right? One, I just like to observe a lot of other things going on around me, whether it's, nowadays with Twitter, etc. It's easy enough to keep track of. And I don't mean just, looking at news bits or anything else, just a wider view of what else is going on in the world. Second is I play Sudoku. So, more to at the hard level. So I have an app on my phone. So I try to play at least 2 or 3 games a day, just to keep myself active. And no, I don't time myself as much. It's more of finishing it rather than the timing part. So, I have to say that I have a 99% finish rate according to my app. Once or twice I've kind of abandoned it for other reasons, but I try to at least get it done, right? So I do that. And I get a lot of, obviously, pre-COVID interacting with people, right? Just wide variety of people, diverse varieties of people from various domains, so that you can learn more from them, right? But of course, you miss that now because of the kind of the COVID situation. But that's where I spend my time. Of course, reading is, as you guys are aware, I do read a lot.
Right. And which is also borne out by some of the peak, the shelves behind you. So
actually, I have a whole set of shelves above me which you can't see.
Oh, I think they're looking at the wrong side of your room right now.
So I have, I don't know how visible it is, but I have bookshelves all the way up on top and behind me as well, behind this monitor, where I have a lot of books. That's the only probably one failing I have. I buy a lot of books. I may not read all of it all the time, but I do buy, and I'll get through most of it.
Mm-hmm. So, one common thing that a lot of people like to say is that finding time for pursuits is hard. And you will hear even younger people say that. And here you are at a leadership position and you're clearly making time for Sudoku and reading. So do you have a system around it? How do you protect your time and make sure that these things done?
So I think I've always had this, right? I mean, I prioritize, I take a look at what's critical and what's important, and the important stuff will take a slightly longer time for me to get to. I do procrastinate, so I can't say that I do everything all the time. I have lists of things that I need to get to over time, nothing ever, eventually won't get dropped, but it just, depends on how much time I do. Second thing is, and maybe it's a function of as you grow in your career, of delegating.
Mm.
I have no compunctions in delegating, to others to do what they I believe will get things done better than even I can. Right?
Mm.
I don't mind delegating.
Right.
So I kind of try to carve out about 10 to 15, 20%, whatever I can, to do something which is not purely work related.
Mm.
And some of this wasn't true. I mean, maybe 10 years, until about 10 years ago, I wasn't paying attention to this.
Okay.
And one of my mentors once, I was quite burnt out. I was traveling a lot. I was managing global teams. I was based in Bangalore, but I was literally, living on a plane to
Mm.
somewhere in the world every month. Right? And I even remember a tweet the early days of Twitter, and I have a tweet I think somewhere very early on
Mm.
that said burning a candle from both ends with a blowtorch. And I remember writing it when I was sitting in Dubai airport, and I wasn't sure whether I was coming back to India or leaving from India. Sometimes you kind of zone out, right? When you're so tired. I mean, I don't know if you guys have experienced this. Sometimes you wake up in a hotel room and you're not sure where you are in the world at that point. So you get into that, right? So I was talking to one of my mentors, and he asked me, he said, "Hey, what do you do for hobby?"
Mm.
And I had, when I was younger, I used to do other things. I used to play tennis. I used to do a bunch of other stuff. But work kind of pressures kind of pushed out every other thing that you did, right? Between work and family, there wasn't a whole lot of time left.
Mm.
And I suddenly realized that all my interests had gone away. I mean, I used to still read because I had time to read on a plane or something, but I would do that. But other than that, I had almost lost interest in everything else, right? Or lost time. So then I started consciously doing this. So I keep a few things, I may not be good at it, whether I'm sketching, you've seen some examples of
Yeah.
that, I like to share it publicly, or not because I want to boast about it, but it's only to give others think that, hey, you can also
Right.
find that and do that. So I started picking up a few things. I've also dropped a few things along the way. So try to get back to things. I like photography, so I take a lot of pictures. I used to do it with DSLRs in the past, but I now use my phone a lot more. But I like to find unique angles on pictures and things like that. Right? So I still do that. So I mean, I try to keep some amount of time set aside for. It doesn't need to be like you have to set aside hours, right?
Right.
Even if you do it for 10 minutes, I think it's okay. But it gives you a distraction and a break, especially nowadays with, you're jumping from one Zoom call to the next. It gives you something to do other than just work related discussions.
Right. So, in fact, you make a good point because it's easy to let the treadmill kind of take you and then back and rinse and repeat. And I think I wanted to ask you a follow-up question. So, if you now look back, what have been a few of those things that have given you a long-term or an advantage over the long term, but in the short term felt like inefficient or distracting seemingly, or people told you that this could be a potential distraction, but now you look back and say it actually has paid off. Are there anything that come to mind?
Nothing in particular. I mean, I don't get too guilty about wasting time on things, but
Mhm.
even if others can consider that as a waste of time, not that I can think of. I think, but there are a few things maybe as I think back that which has stayed with me more than anything else.
Mhm.
I'm not the most talkative person.
Mhm.
Uh, so I like listening. So it probably has given me an advantage professionally as well.
Mhm.
It allows me to hear other people's point of view without me having to, feel obliged to jump in and speak all the time,
Mhm.
right? Which has helped me both professionally in, as a manager for sure, because I think many of the people, my team members as well as others, they feel that at least they're getting a good hearing from me and listening from me, right? Not just hearing, but listening, because I like to, at least imbibe what they're telling me
Right.
and be able to repeat it back to them over time or do something about it. But professionally, I'm a product manager by background.
Mhm.
And one of the tenets of product management is the fact that you are able to listen to your customers and hear the unstated needs more than what they tell you what's bothering them on a daily basis.
Correct.
Be able to get through that, right? Get into the depth of some of the things that you're hearing from people.
Mhm.
And I think that has stood well as well with me, both as a professionally in that role as well as in other roles,
Mhm.
to actually get to the heart of what people are trying to say,
Mhm.
rather than what they're saying itself.
Mhm.
The words sometimes hide the real intent behind what they are. So I think, I would find that's one thing that has probably been with me for a long time.
Mhm.
That trait, and then not that I developed it. It's just maybe it's more natural,
Right.
but it's a way of turning that around, into
Right.
something.
Right. So to those, and I think you've mentioned this occasionally to people, like, keep cultivating your interests. It pays off in ways you don't foresee at the time of doing it. So to someone who wants to be a better product manager, for instance, what do you think are the kinds of things they should do so to develop this human side, be it listening better, more empathy, those kinds of things?
No, those are the human side. On the professional front, I think, curiosity, I think, is a very good trait to have, because you're trying to get to understanding things better, you know, and then get into the depth of things. Pick the seam and then go down the seam, right?
Correct.
But to pick the seam, you need to get a lot of inputs. You need to look around, see inputs, ability to get a wide variety of people, inputs from wide variety of sources, and be able to synthesize that and then say, okay, here are three things that I believe we need to go after, and go after those deeply, right?
Right.
I think those are the kinds of things, are skills that people need to develop. It's not about hard skills. In fact, even the other day, there was a question. I was on another panel,
Mhm.
and somebody asked the question about, what recommend two books that somebody could read about product management, right?
Mhm.
And product management is not learned by reading books. It's learned as it's really more of picking up tips and tricks and traits from others that you work with on a constant basis.
Mhm.
And they need not be other product managers.
Correct.
It could be, everybody in your organization that you work with, whether it's salespeople, whether it's lawyers, whether it is your CEO, right? And be able to pick out the things that are working there and then apply it to what you do on a daily basis. Um, so there are hard functional skills, of course, like, how do you manage backlogs and room backlogs and all that.
Mhm.
But then there are the softer skills, and it's really an art and a science that comes together. I think great product managers are very good at that art and science. You know, they don't just look at the data; they get informed by the data and then take actions based on that. Big difference between the two.
True. So while we are talking about books, are there any books that you would recommend to people to understand, say, leadership or markets in India? They may not necessarily be books directly about those topics. It could be a work of fiction, for example, but something that think that this would make a great window into understanding people or markets better.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there are many books on leadership. I mean, I don't know if I can pick out one or two that kind of stand out. Yes, there are a lot of books. Um, India in particular, right? I mean, I used to look at the India market very closely across two, three different jobs I had over the years. And and there are books by people like Rama Bijapurkar, for example,
Mm.
right? Who very deep insights about the consumers in India. What works in these markets. How do you think about the socio-economic segments? And it was a little interesting because my professional journey started in the U.S. It wasn't here.
Right.
And US, even though of course US also has different stratas and all those other things, the socio-economic my big takeaway when I started looking at the India market is how discontinuous socio-economic segments are in India. When we talk about India versus Bharat, right? Those kinds of things. It is not a continuum. A lot
Mm.
of people, when I think one of the things that Western companies, when they start to come to India and start to, figure out what to do in India, they tend to bring a lot of the cohesive mindset. So they think about continuum between and let's take the consumer segments, right?
Mm.
The top of the pyramid, the middle of the pyramid, kind of the middle has two parts, probably upper mid and lower mid, and then the bottom of the pyramid, etc.
Mm.
And a lot of it is treated as a continuum.
Mm.
In India, you can't treat it as a continuum. There are discontinuities of various sorts, right? And those discontinuities have to be handled very differently. The
Mm.
top 150 million people in the pyramid in India behave very differently than the mid levels versus the bottom of the pyramid.
Mm. Mm.
And those need to be understood well if you're a marketer, if you are building products for these segments, for these markets, those kinds of things. And even then, it surprises you because sometimes those things change very rapidly in these markets. And it's not just India. So I used to run emerging markets for a while when I was at Yahoo. And emerging markets cut across geos. So we had parts of Southeast Asia, I had India, we had Middle East, we had Latin America, right? And then also US. So I had teams, I had other products that were focused on the other markets. But what we understood by, what my big takeaway as we went through that process is there is a lot more in common across emerging, so what they would call emerging markets,
Right.
than what we would think.
Mm.
Until I read the Factfulness book by
Mm.
Rosling, right? And then I think, I would look at as a marketer, right? If I
Mm.
wear my marketing hat,
Right.
that book was very eye opening. I only read it last December, even though the book's been around for a while.
Right.
And it completely reframed for me how I should be thinking about these markets,
Mm.
right? I mean, his whole point is there are four major segments in every market.
Right.
And you cannot be looking at it as emerging markets versus emerged markets versus whatever. And
Mm.
that's how typically we are taught to look at things, right? When we're, I'm not a marketing person. I'm a product marketer perhaps,
Mm.
and a product manager. But that book was quite, completely turned on its head in terms of how I would think about it. And it made complete sense, right?
Correct.
Even if I take US, I would have to think about those four cohorts that he talks about in that book in
Mm.
terms of examining what works, right?
Mm.
And he talks about in one case it's food, one case it's, you grow up, you get some transport, and
Right.
that changes the way what allows you to do, not do. Then you go one level above that, then you have house and, a little more wealth, and then you have the really wealthy, right?
Right.
And it changes. Of course, the segments are different, the size may be different across markets, etc. But if I think about it from that lens, and
Mm.
then I look at some of the books about India in terms of socioeconomic segments, it makes a lot of sense, right? How to examine these markets and think about it. So anyway, so these are just few books, but I would say there's a variety of these kinds of books that frame it. And then there are people who write like Gurcharan Das, etc., who write about the Indian psyche, right?
Right.
And they're fantastic books to just read and absorb and understand how this thing. And of course, there's a lot of fiction about India. So
Right. Thanks. That's actually Factfulness is one of our favorite books as well. Harish likes to evangelize the book a lot, so music to his ears. Harish, do you want to say something in connection with that?
Yeah, not with factfulness, but one slightly philosophical question that struck me, Ram. Do you think people in India who are working as product managers for products addressing, say, markets outside, do you think there is some kind of a tension between the life that they are living here in India versus, the kind of thinking that they have in their work life when they are looking at these markets? Is there a tension? Because as you said, there is a clear distinction between the two kinds of markets and the way people work and live.
yes and no. I mean, obviously, if you've never lived in the US and you're trying to cater to that market, you may not be able to relate to everything that happens. But the flip is also true. I mean, people who live in Silicon Valley don't necessarily experience the rest of the world, right? But they're able to build something that actually can scale across markets. So I'm not sure it's about as much about where you live and what you do. I think it's more about how open are you to absorbing and understanding what the other person's context is, right? The ability to figure out ways to understand the context of the market that you're trying to serve. Because I mean, you can build products for any market. I mean, if that's the case, a Facebook product manager sitting in Mountain View should not be able to cater to the Bharat people in India, right? With WhatsApp. I mean, by the same token, they have no way to. I mean, in fact, I would say we could experience Western way of life a little better than somebody is living in the valley who can't relate to somebody's in tier two town in India who's using some of their products, right? So they have so there are methods of understanding and getting to the depth of understanding where your core markets are and what is it that's making them tick. It is effort. I mean, I'm not minimizing the effort required to make those kind of things, right? And reaching out to people, forming those opinions. If right now it's not possible, but the ability to visit, if you can, to just go and walk around. See, one of the things I learned, and I saw one of your questions earlier, which is it talks about what are like one or two traits that has stood me well, right? One of the things I would say is power of observation. I like actually sitting around and watching people. People may think me strange, but But we have done that. I mean, when I used to run emerging markets, I would visit places like Amman, Jordan, right? We had a team there. And sitting around in a coffee shop and just watching people walk by, right? It was very informative and illustrative how people operate, how people live their lives, right? My first time I went to Japan, I was on a train, and it was and this was pre-smartphone days, right? When people still had a you know, like a flip phone kind of phones, right? And you could observe that nobody was talking, right? Everybody was typing on their phone, so the text messaging was really large, right? And then a few years ago, I had gone to China and sitting around in a Starbucks, drinking a coffee. I was watching, everybody was walking with their smartphones held horizontally because they were dictating messages. They were not typing because maybe it's the complexity of typing, the language on a phone. But all of them were holding their phones horizontally and talking into the microphone rather than holding it vertically and talking, right, or to the ear. So I assumed that, and I asked somebody, and they said, "Oh, they are recording messages." So they were instead of text messages, they were sending voice messages. So, so all I'm saying is that those are things, just small data points, but it is interesting to observe how people operate, how they live, right? Even in India, I think observations of how do people who are not literate, right, who don't know how to read and write language, are still using smartphones, or be able to, or in the previous generation were using text phones, right? Were able to text messages. They had figured out a language of communication through that mechanism, even if they didn't know how to read and write. So how do you cater to that, right? How do you then if you're a, if I wear my product management hat and I'm designing a product for that market space, you have to understand that, right? And that, how do people interact with those devices and how do they actually, make themselves understood and communicate? So I think observation of your people around you is a very critical piece, and I do that today, right? I learn a lot by observing the way my organization operates. How do people work? How do people think? you know, that forms opinions on what we need to do within the organization from a strategy perspective.
So
So
Ram,
yeah, now that once you publish this, everybody will be watching me keenly to see if I'm being observed.
so are you the kind that takes notes or so distributes them? Is there a kind of
I
aspect to the observation?
Sometimes, but a lot of times not. A lot of times it forms opinions. It doesn't form an opinion. It refines an opinion.
Right.
The way I like to think is I'll form a hypothesis and then validate and invalidate the hypothesis based on what I'm observing, what I'm reading, it allows me to learn faster when I do that. Initially, yes. I mean, initially, if I'm completely greenfield, like I say, I take on a new role, right? I take about 90 days to talk to people, observe, read, do whatever. But by the end of the 60th day, I generally have an opinion on what needs to happen, hypothesis, what we need to do. And then the rest of the time is spent on validating, invalidating, talking to people, putting hypotheses in front of people to see how they react, what are their observations, etc. So, yes, I mean, you have seen some of the strategy work that we were doing even in VMware. And a lot of that early stages of that opinion was formed in my first 90 days in the company. And we have refined it since then.
Right. So I just wanted to also ask you, some of the things that you mentioned, understanding your market, kind of getting out there, spending time surrounded by people, it's almost anthropological in that sense. These are things that other industries, you look at FMCG, for instance, that they teach, young graduates, freshers very early. But if you look at the tech world, we're often very abstracted from the outside world, and a lot of the good, the bad, the ugly of who you're actually building for doesn't reach you and doesn't reach you very quickly. So do you have any thoughts on how, someone who's just starting off, or how companies also should organize this a little bit so that, this aspect comes into play far earlier?
See, the thing is, you're absolutely right. I mean, FMCG, the role of a product manager was defined in FMCG, if you think about it, right? We adapted it for the tech world from the FMCG world. In fact, one of the things, I would say about 10 years ago, when I joined Yahoo, my boss at that time challenged me to go and say, look, at that time, tech product management was not prevalent in India. And we wanted to start a movement in the market to actually make product management, evangelize product management more. So I used to go to business schools to talk to MBA students, right? And I would ask the question, how many of you want to be product managers? 3/4 of the room would put up their hands, right? And then ask them, how many of you want to be tech product managers? There'll probably be 2 hands left because the people want, I mean, their aspiration was to go join Hindustan Lever or, one of these, ITC and companies like that to be brand managers, and slash product managers, depending on what the role was called. But it was really that, right? People would want to do that. But the skill sets that, as you rightly point out, what they learned in business schools, communication skills or marketing skills, etc. How to break down a market by, how do you look at addressable market? How do you actually start to look at segmentation and be able to then build a strategy around segmentation? Those are no different than what you would do in a tech world. It's the same thing, right? If the product is different, technology is different, how you may, how you may go to market could be different, etc. But it is not the mechanics of what you do is not very different. Okay. So I think the companies, I was fortunate to work for companies early on in my career where this was actually well understood. And there were people that you could learn from around you. There were formal, both, processes where you could learn from others around you as well as in the job, right? You could observe others, work with others who are further along in the career in these domains. I think that's what we've been trying to replicate even in India. Is if you look at over the years, we've had many different forums, both industry forums, people like NASSCOM, etc., where product management as a skill set has been brought forward. The good part now is there's been a lot more people in the market who hold those kind of roles, both senior people who have done this in multiple avatars, as well as people who are just started out their careers and could learn from others. And there are industry forums starting up that to share ideas, share experiences, and bring that forward, which is great, right? That needs to happen because we can build all the engineering we want. Engineering to products still requires ability to somebody to take the customer's point of view on building those products. It's not just about the technology you build, right? But the good part is, I think, in the last 5-10 years, especially with startups, you see a lot more of that type of skill sets coming up. I won't say they're all great at it, but at least they're doing it. And I think they're willing to ask the questions, willing to learn. So there are a lot more forums coming up now, which are about practicing product managers and how they get better at it, rather than people just saying, okay, I want to get into product management and how do I, make the entry? That was a lot of that conversation used to happen in the past. Now people are stepping up and saying, how do I get better at what I do? And do those things.
Right. So staying with that, uh, a lot of people are now, they start off as specialists and then they make a transition to a more generalist kind of role, which calls for a wider variety of inputs, the observation ability, the ability to connect, and also work with data. So that's something that keeps happening.
Right.
What is your advice for people who are struggling with or are attempting to make that transition happen? Is that a transition you also made? And what would you advise people?
Yeah, I mean, I made that too. I mean, my role today has got nothing to do with building products.
Right.
But the experiences that I gained by working with people, working with, understanding segments, understanding, how to build strategy, how do you validate it, invalidate it with data, as well as observation, and then take it forward. That's what I do today, right? I mean, it's no different. As my role is a more a general manager role at this point of the India site. And so I don't build products. The India site is a product by itself for me, right? So the way you would treat it that way. I think what I would say is, as I know, there is a transition. You rightly point out, there's a transition in your career as you grow in your career, where you're going to move from being a specialist to becoming a generalist, and you have to be comfortable doing that, right? A lot of people struggle with that transition point. They don't want to give up their execution mindset. They've become successful by doing that, right? I mean, they grew through the organization because they were specialists. They were very good at building product, engineering or some other function in their role, or sales or whatever, right? But there is a point in their career where by necessity they have to switch over, especially when you're becoming a manager of multiple levels of people, you're far removed from execution.
Right.
while you should not lose your mind, your role as a, I'm a bit of a heretic here where I say that everybody, even if you're a manager, right, even if you're the CEO of a company, there's an element of an individual contributor built into your role. And I think where I see people failing is where they don't recognize that. They don't recognize the fact that you have to keep a certain elements of your skill set still sharp, right? The ability to get things done, ability to, getting others to get things done, right? Influencing. These are skill sets that you learn early in your career, right? Because influencing people, influencing outcomes, framing outcomes, the whole goal setting process is framing an outcome. It's not about, I'm going to do 5 meetings today. That's not what it's about. It's about getting things done, right? And that doesn't change as you grow in your career. So certain dimensions of learnings that you have early on in your career doesn't change, right? How you apply it may change over time. And you have to get comfortable at some point that you're switching into a much more of a generalist role, right? And this is a conversation, career conversation I have with many of our senior folks in our organizations and other organizations in reach out. They keep saying, "Oh, I need to hold on to my engineering strengths." Now, I said, don't lose that, right? The point here is not to lose an area that you resonate with, you're good at, etc. You have made a career choice. You've either become a manager early on, and sometime mid-career, you made a shift. You've become a manager, or you've remained an individual contributor in the technology ranks in particular. You have remained an individual contributor, fantastic. But you're still a leader at some point, right? People are looking up to you for leadership. And you are bringing in those generalist skills. If you become a manager, your career path is decided. A manager's role is not about engineering execution. Right? You're transitioning out of that when you hit about director level, senior director, etc. By the time you're a VP, or which is by designation would be multiple levels of organization below you, you're no longer an executor of engineering. You're not lost your engineering skills, but you're now a general manager. You have to take into account of people management, organizational influencing, working with your senior leadership on strategy. You have to take on that. Now, you don't want to wake up one morning and be in that role without having gained the experience to do it. So you have to recognize when you're making that switch and when you're making the transition, get comfortable with it and start to give up some of that to people below you. Like, let them execute, let them do the work that needs to be done, create capacity for yourself to learn those new skills that are needed. And I think it's very important to do that over time, right? And do it thoughtfully.
Right. In some sense, the individual contributor shifting out means that the way they have leverage over the situation is now different, because, as you said, it shifts from directly affecting the outcome to influencing the other parts of the system to get that done. So, in fact, in this book written by the Pixar's Ed Catmull, he talks about how when he became a leader, then he only started getting good news, right? Because he no longer had a network to tell you about things that are not going fine, and all those layers start to emerge. So did you have to teach yourself how to, what are the different kinds of sense making elements that you start to add to your repertoire in some sense, so that you're discerning bad news early? Tell us a little bit about that.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the higher up, you don't have to be that high up in the organization before you start to lose in touch with the rank and file of your organization, especially if you're in management, right? Because as you grow levels, right, you're only talking to people. If you're only talking to your next level below you, you'll hear what getting filtered. So one of the things that I consciously started doing was setting up smaller group meetings with the next levels, skip levels to some extent, right? Or even right now, for example, we have a very large organization. And one of the things I do more consciously is set up time with smaller groups, cohorts of people from the rank and file that I spend time with. Because then you start to hear the unfiltered information that's coming back. And then you can correlate that against, what else are you hearing, right? Second thing is you have to make it a safe environment to come have those conversations, not be judgmental. In fact, I don't notionally, I don't take notes in those meetings. Not written. I'm not sitting there with a notebook writing down what they tell me, because some of it is also about trust, right? That what's mentioned in the room stays in the room to some extent. Sometimes, if it's a touchy conversation, and if it's feedback that's coming back about the organization, people are naturally hesitant about opening up, So you have to create those safer atmospheres where people are willing to speak up, right? I mean, and you need to hear multiple parts of that conversation and then bring a synthesized version of that to other forums, so that you can look at it not by individuals feedback but collective feedback of what's coming back, right? And we have done that, and we have, not the effect of it gets felt when you take that collective feedback, read into it, and then make a change that lets you do that. So for example, we changed the way we do larger organizational level all hands, for example, right? Because one of the feedbacks we heard was people didn't find the topics effective enough for them. They couldn't relate their job to the information that they were getting. So we actually changed it. We made it a lot more, purpose driven, in the sense that people could relate better to their day-to-day job, to what is happening in the market, what's happening in the company, and hence why is their job relevant. And that started getting positive feedback, right? But we started using it as a mechanism to also give a feedback to the organization that, look, somebody mentioned it a few people mentioned it in a meeting, and that had an effect of changing the way we think about and how we do this. So let's make sure those pipelines of communications are open and and available, so that we can actually make it more effective. It's an effective dialogue mechanism rather than it is about pinpointing problems alone. Because I also saw, I like soliciting ideas from people. How do we fix it? It's not just about coming up with a problem. Do you have ideas on how we can do something differently or better, right? And that always makes for a positive dialogue.
Right. Since you mentioned, getting together with different groups, there is also, as a leader, you now have people from multiple generations below you, we've seen you in action. How do you try and connect with someone and be seen as relevant by them? More than they being relevant to you as well. You also have to be seen as relevant to these audiences, so that they can talk to you, they can share what's on their mind.
Well,
about
on a lighter note, I may think I'm relevant, but they may not think I'm relevant. But you have to ask them the question to find that answer out. But I think what I have found is that the younger generations, they don't want to be preached to.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that a lot from my own kids, right? So we're probably in the same age groups. What I enjoy in talking to them is the lack of hesitancy in just saying things, right? I actually, I not in this role, but in one of my previous jobs, I was the general manager of the India site, and I had a fairly large team globally reporting to me. And I had a new college graduate walk into my office late one evening, right? I said, okay, come on in. So he says, you're not doing your job well. So I said, why? And he had his own, whatever it was. I don't even remember what it was, but he had some pet peeve about something that wasn't hearing. But I think I completely enjoyed it. I spent half an hour with him, right? And I'm sure he walked away more confused than he walked in, but at the end of it. But I actually enjoy that, right? I like the youngsters coming in with their own very hard opinions on, what's not working, okay? Because then you can engage them in a dialogue and say, okay, good. Now tell me how you would fix it. You have my job for a day. What will you do? And they come up with ideas, which is okay. But it informs us. The change that I just said on our all hands, this was exactly came out of a conversation with a new college graduate who was 6 months in the system. And this young lady said, hey, I attend these meetings, but I'm getting nothing out of it. So I said, why? And she said, oh, I'm getting nothing out of it because I can't relate to what's being said. So then I actually went and probed people in mid-levels as well, saying, hey, this is what I'm hearing. What do you think? And they also said the same thing. They said, but they're not spoken up, right? Because, whatever, they had inhibitions of speaking up, but we made the change. And that had a positive effect through the organization. But that came from somebody from, like I said, who had been in the company for 6 months, was a new college graduate. So the great ideas don't need to come from only people with gray hair or no hair like me, right? It can come from anywhere. And again, it comes back to that listening thing that I talked about. People want to be listened to. They don't want to be heard. They want to be listened to. Now, and I tell them, I said, great ideas, but I may not be able to do all of it that you're telling me, but we will look at the essence of what you're saying and try to see what we can do about it. So, no guarantees, but what we'll guarantee is that what you have said will have an impact in terms of how we take things into consideration. And that's what I have seen is, the way to relate with that age group, of any age group really, is that people should feel that they're having a honest conversation with somebody. Right? And I think that helps a great deal in doing that.
This is almost a timeless approach, right? You can do this forever with anyone, and I think it should pay off. So while we're
I mean, I get irritated when somebody starts off by telling me, right, let me tell you. And I'm like, okay, that's not what I'm here for, right? Well, let me tell you what you should be doing. I'm like, okay, tell me what the issue is, tell me what the problem is, and then we'll see. So let me be the judge of what I believe, I need to hear and decide.
Right. So while we're speaking of ideas, one question that we wanted to ask you was that innovation inside companies versus innovation outside, where especially in these days when the incentives are so starkly different. You could be in a startup, your ideas have instant ramifications. You can see the feedback loop is much smaller versus companies where how do you get people to contribute to innovation is more of the persuasion route or linking it to purpose, for example. Or like you said in the example of this someone who's fresh, is to just give them that avenue to get their energies flowing. So how do you see incentives for people within an organization, and how do you shape those incentives so that people contribute to what is, after all, something that you do outside your stated job?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, you guys should know it more than anybody else, right? I mean, you do this for a living, helping organizations with helping them kind of drive the whole innovation charter. My observations over time, there are certain group of people you don't have to do anything for them. They will come into any forum, and you can almost predictably know that they'll show up if there is an opportunity to do something. We shouldn't lose that energy, right? One is, give them more and more incentives and opportunities to exercise what they do. Of course, there is an element in companies that they still have to do their day job. They can't be just doing other things, right? But as long as they're doing that, give them more opportunity. There is a group that requires various levels of motivation, and it could be as simple as giving them a contest and giving them a prize at the end of it, right? So you almost need to segment your audience even within organizations to truly understand, who you're dealing with and what incentives you want to put in front of them. Some people are purely looking for, uh, recognition, okay, by their management, by their senior, people that they believe need to, whether it's rightfully or wrongfully believe that they need to be seen by certain kinds of people in the organization and recognized. Okay, that's fine. If that's going to lead to good outcomes, let's create those opportunities for people to be able to do that, right? There is, in any organization, at least tech organizations that I'm more familiar with, there are two kinds of innovation. There is one which is in the roadmap. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. When you're building a feature in a product, are you thinking through the implications of who's going to use it, how they're going to use it, and then do the right set of innovations to get makes it come alive, right? That's one way of doing it. That's important, right? And maybe that's some group of people who only do that. They don't get into future orientation, right? There are others who are very good at greenfield type innovation. I mean, it's a continuum, but okay, let me take this as a continuum, right? So there is the roadmap work. There is extensions to the roadmap, right? There are ideas which are adjacencies to what you're already doing, which is okay, right? That it could be things that could either come back to the roadmap at some point, or you could put it out. Different companies have different mechanisms to release innovation to the market. There's that. Then there are people who are futuristic, right? Who are looking at things happening in the technology world, who are rethinking how this should be done. Those are your very small subset. I mean, they're not going to be, if you're talking about 100 people, I would say less than 10% will be in that bracket, which is okay. You don't need 100 people doing all future oriented work, moonshot work, right? So you need to segment that and say, okay, how is my innovation charter going? If I look at even these three course areas, right? In roadmap, adjacencies to roadmap, and moonshots. And am I involving the right set of people in each of those and who are going to get motivated to do that? If you go to the guys or people who are only motivated by in roadmap work and try to get them to do moonshot work, it may not work. So don't get disappointed that 100 people are not showing up for moonshot. You know, but look at your charter and look at your landscape and say, am I addressing the people who would be most relevant to what they do, what they want to do, and be able to do it? And not everybody can go to a startup and be successful. So I think there is this misinformed notion that everybody who's in a startup is also innovative. No, I think the same things apply there too, right? You'll have the few people, the founders of the company are coming in with their baby, right? Their hypotheses of what they're doing. There are people they will employ to bring it to life. They are your roadmap people. There'll be a few of them who are pushing the envelope and kind of thinking about, hey, if we did this differently, how will it work? They are adjacencies. And there are a few people who will be the moonshot people, and most likely they'll spin out and do their own startup, which is okay, right? So I think we can't assume that everybody who works in a startup is also this extremely innovative person. You need bench players, right? It's like any team.
Yeah.
You need the bench players, you need the superstars, you need the coaches, you need everybody.
And you make a very valid point there, because even big successful companies started off like those startups, and they're just a reflection or a much bigger reflection of that. In fact, that's, I think, the question that you were alluding to earlier. The book Innovators DNA talks about those 5 traits and distinguishes between the delivery skills and the discovery skills. So the discovery, we spoke about observation a little earlier in great detail. There were other traits mentioned like experimentation, associating new ideas, questioning, and also networking. A lot of tech innovation or programs within are often about experimentation. But do you think any of the others are underrated? People should bring them, and we've already spoken about observation. But uh, does networking, for example, strike you as something that people don't do enough of in terms
Yeah,
of?
absolutely. I think networking for reasons, right? I mean, it's not about sending out LinkedIn invites. I mean, I get a lot of those, but that's not networking. Networking to me, see, real networking, I mean, true networking of getting to know people of diverse backgrounds feeds the other things, right? So see, these things are not, even though you talked about those 5 DNAs, and I don't remember all of them. I've read the book a while ago. Um, they are not 5 fingers in a hand. I mean, ultimately the hand is also still connected, right? So to me, experimentation and observation are not necessarily disjoint. If you look at scientific temper, it is about experimentation linked with observation. You're observing what is happening in an experiment. So similarly, networking is no different. Networking is an input to, that's where the curiosity angle kicks in, right? That's where you are going out and talking to people whom you would not talk to normally, right? You get to, you meet the diversity of people of various points of view, various experiences, various, if you're looking at a market area that you want to go talk to people, because the fastest way to learn is by talking to others who have learned something in that business, and then triangulate to what you think you need to do. So yes, absolutely, networking skills are very, very important, very, very critical. And some of the way to network is also to give back. See, I'm also a believer that you can't be just a taker in the world. It'll never work. You have to have the ability to do, lean in and help others as well. Otherwise, why would they come to you? Right? So you need to be a giver. You need to give back as well. You need to pay it forward in some sense. All that pays, that's all part of networking too.
Right. In fact, a great way to just contribute to innovation for just half an hour could be to listen to someone's idea and give them feedback. I think that's a great way to contribute as well. So
Yes.
we have about 5 minutes left on the clock. So before we go into that, since we've spoken about curiosity, we have one more question for you today. And one thing we didn't tell you at the beginning was that for every question you answer correctly, we're going to give you a little prize, which is a free gift membership you can give someone to our reading groups, our reading compounds. So
Okay.
we also love curiosity. So that's a hint, by the way. Just pay attention to what I just said, because our next question is, there was someone employed at 10 Downing Street, the British Prime Minister's office. who had a budget of £100 a month, or a year rather. He was called Humphrey. He served under 3 administrations. And during the Tony Blair administration, he was forced into retirement because the prime minister's wife was allergic to him. And so this person had an official title in 10 Downing Street's cabinet staff. So do you know who Humphrey is?
It's not a cat, right?
Oh, it's you should have done the Jeopardy on it. It is a cat. Well done. So on the theme of
I
curiosity.
remember reading that. Yes.
Yeah, I know. So in fact, it's named after the character or the civil servant in Yes Prime.
Yes, I was going to say that. I was going to ask you if it was named after Humphreys from Sir Humphreys.
It is. Yeah.
From Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister.
Right. So I know you have a cat, and you like your animals,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So
is that a hint from my Twitter feeds?
Yeah.
I tend to like all the animal videos.
I mean, it's I think the golden age, to live in the internet and animals. So
True.
So have you had a lot of pets over the years, or?
Actually, no. We had a dog when I was really young. After that, we never had pets. The cat we have was an adoptee. She adopted us. Walked into our house one day, and the kids forced us to keep it. The kids are no longer here. The cat is still around.
That's actually the story of Humphrey as well, because I think Humphrey just was a stray and became chief.
Cats tend to do that. Yeah, more than dogs. Yeah. Dogs, you have to go out of your way to go adopt them. Cats have a tendency to adopt you.
All right. So our last section, we just want quick hot takes on So we call this the future stack section, which is things that people should add to their skill stack in some sense, so as to be a little more future relevant in the days and years ahead. So I want to ask you one thing that product managers should add to their future stack. It could be an area, it could be a skill, it could be a timeless piece of wisdom. So yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not the wisdom type, so I don't know if I want to do that. But I think if you're in the tech space, I think it's getting more and more interesting to watch the cross pollination across areas.
Mm-hmm.
So synthetic biology, for example, right? I would look at some things like climate change and sustainability.
Right.
I think those are areas that are going to get more and more important as we look ahead. And if you are in the tech space, I think those cross-pollinate, I think that also opens up some really, really interesting ideas that will potentially come forward. And I think, depending on your interest, I mean, it could be, I think those are areas that is going to start emerging as opportunity. I don't think, pure computer science is, I think data is another interesting aspect, and the applicability of data across domains. And then looking at those domains, sometimes, some of these cross-domain pollinations can produce some really interesting results over time. I think digital is becoming the core of a lot of things. We look at traditional industries, everybody is now talking digital. I think what will be interesting as we look ahead is how does that digital come to life across various domains and areas, and what does it mean for various organizations and companies across domains. And I think those, if you're in the tech space today, I think it's a golden, like you mentioned, golden era. I think it's a golden era emerging, which is how do you get relevant to various kinds of industries.
So if you were a fresher walking into your organization today, what is one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Go get your fundamentals strengthened. Science, math, especially if you're in the tech space. It's not about, I get this question constantly about people saying, oh, what next technology should I learn? I've been in this business long enough to know that technologies have a shelf life of 2 to 3 years. What stands over time is the fundamentals of what you learn, right? If you're coming from a business school, make sure that you're keeping your marketing skills, your finance skills up to date. If you're coming from engineering background, make sure that you still continue to learn and understand math and stat. I mean, I wish somebody had told me this early on, because my dislike for stats is quite deep, and that emerged because of I still can't get beyond flipping a coin maybe a few times, right? When it comes to probability and things like that. But now those skills are getting more and more important, right? I think, if you are in science, don't just focus on, physics, right? We look at physics, chemistry, biology. Like for all the points I just made, which is about those cross-domain pollinations coming up. I think get your fundamentals. Don't lose your fundamentals. Keep that strengthened. It's probably easier for a fresh grad than for a mid-career person, because by the time you're mid-career, you've lost most of those skills, right? Including me. And so you need to keep those up to date, because I think that'll be more relevant in the future than which programming language you're going to learn.
So for mid-level pros, one big threat and one big opportunity in the next decade.
Your half-life is rapidly reducing. Okay. I mean, especially if you have not kept up your skill sets, you've not understood what's happening around you. If you're banked on the fact that I've been comfortable in my job for, a number of years, I think, be ready for change, right? There's no doubt. So that was the, kind of the what to watch out for, right? What was the second question?
The opportunity.
I think opportunity, it's how do you take the experiences that you've gained over all these years and be able to unlock that to help your organization, your customers better, right? People are sitting with a minefield. I mean, not a minefield, sorry, a gold mine of information, right?
Right.
But they don't think about how to take that and make it relevant to today's context. And that, I think, is a skill set all of us have to learn. It's not about reskilling. People keep talking about reskilling, right? What is reskilling? It is really to frame yourself in a new context and bring forward the experiences that you've gained over time into the next role that you do or next job you do, and make yourself relevant to the company. Because, this is a time when even organizations are in existential crisis. And they're always looking for people to step forward and say, hey, how can I help? So don't treat your job as a 9 to 5 job, because that is like with any other adage, right? If you're not growing and if you're just sitting in steady state, your shelf life becomes very endangered very quickly.
In fact, since you mentioned minefield and gold mine, probably people, instead of treating it as a gold mine, are treating it as a minefield. That's the mindset they bring in.
No, it's not that. I think people are not. I think people need you need coaching, right? I mean, you need people around you who are helping you through that process. It's very difficult for somebody who's in a role who's kind of reframing themselves. I think the role of people, of their mentors, that's the other thing, right? We didn't talk about building a mentorship network around you.
Right.
Who can give you a reflection of, help you think through what you need to do next, right? Not tell you what to do, but help you discover what is the center, based on your interests, your areas of focus. How can you bring forward your own experiences to the next level and be relevant to what is going on? So I think you need more of that, right? And you need people around you who can help you through that process. And that comes from networking and mentorship, building a network of mentors around you and building a network of people around you, right? From whom you can learn. Pay it forward, like I said, go get involved in volunteering, do other things that will help you learn better, kind of get you out of that, rut, if you may, that you're part of, right?
Yeah. So, Ram, any tips on how to build this mentoring network around you? Because people start with that block that no, I have to solve my problems myself. And as you say, I think that's one of the fundamental problems. How do you, how do they make that switch, and how do they actually go seek out these mentors?
See, I think it can be through recommendations. It doesn't need to be that you have to see. I think a lot of people think that they don't know anybody and they have to get there, right? But sometimes it could be just talking to people you already know and say, hey, I would like to meet a couple of people who can help me through this problem that I'm struggling. Do you know anybody? And they will be surprised, right? Because getting a friend or a colleague to introduce you to somebody else is a lot easier than doing a cold call to somebody and say, hey, can you mentor me? It doesn't work that. So a good starting point is just talk to the people you already know and say, hey, can you recommend somebody? And it doesn't need to be somebody in your profession. It could be somebody who's completely different, right? But you bring up a good point, Harish, which is you have to be honest with yourself that you have a problem or you need help. Now, if you're not, if you're going around saying nobody can tell me anything and I don't need to have any help, then that's a different problem. Then you have to figure out that path out for yourself. But finding and building a network is not that difficult. especially in our kind of world.
Right.
Right? I mean, or you just follow people, right? I mean, Twitter allows you to do that. Find 4 or 5 people that you kind of really resonate with and follow. Not for the wrong reasons, obviously, but that's easy to do also. But some whom you can learn, right? And do that. There are various ways of doing it. But not doing it is not a good idea.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Good. What else? You're on mute, Ramanand.
Sorry about that. I had to shift Wi-Fi. I think on that note, thanks a lot. It's been a fascinating hour listening to a lot of things that we spoke about. So thanks so much for doing this, Ram.
You're welcome. Thank you. And
Thank
thanks
you.
for having me.